The day Nolan Pierce lost everything, the city barely noticed. The sun was shining over downtown glass towers, people hurried through crosswalks with coffee cups in hand, and giant digital billboards flashed luxury ads above streets filled with noise and ambition. But inside the 43rd floor conference room of one of the biggest logistics companies in the state, a single sentence destroyed a man's future in front of everyone he had worked beside for 11 years. CEO Vanessa Holbrook leaned back in her leather chair, cold confidence written across her face, and announced that Nolan Pierce was finished. Not struggling. Not replaceable. Finished. The room went silent while Nolan stood there holding the termination envelope in trembling hands, trying not to think about his 7-year-old daughter waiting for him at home with a science project she had begged him to help finish before bedtime. Before we continue, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Wisdom Story House, if you believe kindness and second chances can still change lives. Stories like this remind us that even broken people can rise again when the world counts them out. Nolan walked out of the skyscraper carrying a cardboard box filled with family photos, an old coffee mug, and a tiny paper flower his daughter Ivy had made for him during Father's Day at school. The city looked different now. Colder. Larger. Cruel in a way he had never noticed before. He sat in his old pickup truck for nearly 20 minutes staring at the steering wheel while traffic crawled around him under the bright afternoon sun. His hands shook not because he was angry, but because he was terrified. His savings were nearly gone after his wife's medical bills drained everything 2 years earlier before cancer took her away forever. He had spent every remaining ounce of strength trying to stay afloat for Ivy. Every overtime shift. Every missed meal. Every sleepless night had been for her. And now he had nothing. That evening, Nolan forced a smile when he opened the apartment door. Ivy came running toward him with messy braids and paint on her cheeks, proudly holding up her half-finished volcano project. The smell of macaroni and glue filled the tiny apartment while sunlight poured through cheap curtains onto worn furniture. Nolan dropped to his knees and hugged her tightly for longer than usual. She noticed immediately. Children always do. He didn't tell her he lost his job. Instead, he spent the evening helping her paint lava streams onto cardboard mountains while quietly calculating how many days remained before rent was due. Over the following weeks, rejection became part of Nolan's routine. Every interview ended the same way. Companies wanted younger executives, cheaper managers, or candidates without complicated schedules. Being a single father who needed flexibility was apparently a liability. The pressure mounted daily. Bills stacked across the kitchen counter like silent threats. Some nights Nolan skipped dinner so Ivy could eat properly. Other nights he lay awake listening to rain against the apartment windows while wondering how close they were to homelessness. Then came the final blow. The apartment building was sold to developers. Tenants had 30 days to leave. Nolan stood outside the leasing office staring at the eviction notice while construction crews already surveyed nearby lots for luxury renovations. It felt as if the entire city was erasing people like him to make room for wealthier lives. 3 days later, while driving through the industrial district searching for temporary warehouse work, Nolan saw it. An abandoned warehouse stood near the edge of the river, hidden behind rusted fencing and overgrown weeds. The building looked forgotten by time itself. Broken windows reflected the afternoon sunlight like shattered mirrors. Graffiti covered cracked walls. Part of the roof had collapsed inward years earlier. A faded sign still hung above massive loading doors no longer capable of opening completely. Something about it stopped him. Maybe it was because the building looked exactly how he felt inside. Ruined. A weathered auction notice hung crookedly on the fence. The property was scheduled for bank liquidation after years of neglect. Most people would have laughed at the idea of buying it. Nolan should have too. He had barely enough money to survive another month. But as he stood there under the warm daylight with trucks roaring past nearby highways, he saw possibilities nobody else could see. During his years in logistics management, he had learned one truth most executives ignored: small local businesses were desperate for affordable storage and delivery solutions. Large corporations charged impossible rates. Smaller operations were dying because they had nowhere to grow. For the first time in weeks, Nolan felt something dangerous. Hope. He used nearly every remaining dollar he had left to secure the warehouse at auction. Friends called him reckless. Former co-workers called him insane. Vanessa Holbrook heard about it through industry gossip and laughed openly during a corporate luncheon, telling investors the single dad had finally lost his mind. But Nolan didn't quit. Every morning before sunrise, he brought Ivy to the warehouse. While golden daylight stretched across the riverfront, they cleaned debris together wearing cheap gloves and dust masks. Ivy swept shattered glass into piles while Nolan repaired walls, fixed electrical lines, and hauled scrap metal into dumpsters borrowed from local contractors. The work was brutal. Summer heat turned the warehouse into an oven by noon. Sweat soaked through Nolan's shirts while his muscles screamed with exhaustion. Yet each day the building changed slightly. Broken corners became usable spaces. Darkness slowly turned into possibility. One afternoon, Ivy used sidewalk chalk to draw giant flowers near the entrance. When Nolan asked why, she simply said the building looked sad and needed something pretty. That sentence nearly broke him. Because deep down, he realized she was talking about him too. Months passed. Nolan took temporary night jobs unloading freight trucks to keep food on the table while rebuilding the warehouse during daylight hours. He survived on caffeine, determination, and love for his daughter. Then finally, a local furniture maker rented a small storage section. A week later, a family-owned bakery leased another area for distribution. Slowly, word spread about the affordable warehouse with the hard-working owner who treated struggling businesses with respect instead of greed. By the following spring, the once abandoned property had transformed into a thriving cooperative logistics center serving dozens of local entrepreneurs. And that's when Vanessa Holbrook noticed. Her corporation had recently launched an expensive expansion into regional delivery services, but clients unexpectedly began leaving. Small companies preferred Nolan's operation because he understood their struggles personally. He offered flexible contracts, fair pricing, and human compassion instead of polished executive promises. For the first time in years, Vanessa faced real competition. She responded aggressively. Corporate lawyers suddenly appeared with zoning complaints. Inspectors arrived weekly searching for violations. Anonymous online attacks questioned Nolan's credibility. Suppliers were pressured not to work with him. One evening, Nolan discovered tires slashed on multiple delivery vehicles parked outside the warehouse. Fear returned. But so did resilience. The businesses operating inside the warehouse stood beside him. Mechanics volunteered repairs. Local restaurant owners delivered meals for workers. Artists painted murals across formerly damaged walls. What began as one desperate man's gamble evolved into a community built from people society had underestimated. And at the center of it all stood Ivy. She greeted drivers every afternoon after school, handed out lemonade during hot days, and taped encouraging drawings onto office doors whenever someone looked discouraged. Workers started calling her the little heart of the warehouse. One stormy afternoon, Vanessa herself arrived unexpectedly. Her black luxury sedan rolled slowly across puddles toward the warehouse while thunder echoed over the riverfront. Employees watched nervously as she stepped out wearing an expensive coat untouched by rain. Nolan met her near the loading dock. For several seconds neither spoke. The warehouse behind them buzzed with life. Forklifts moved inventory. Music played softly from open workspaces. People laughed while carrying boxes through sunlight streaming from repaired skylights overhead. The place no longer resembled ruin. Vanessa looked around carefully, almost disturbed by what she saw. Because Nolan had built something she never understood. Not just a business. A family. She offered him a deal worth millions. Acquisition. Partnership. Executive restoration. Everything he once dreamed of. Nolan refused quietly. Not because he hated her, but because he finally understood something success had hidden from him for years. Real wealth wasn't found inside skyscrapers or quarterly profits. It lived inside moments. Inside people helping one another survive. Inside a daughter drawing flowers on broken concrete because she believed sad things could become beautiful again. Vanessa left without another word. But the battle wasn't over. Weeks later, massive flooding struck the industrial district after relentless daytime storms caused the river to overflow. Water surged through streets, swallowing vehicles and destroying buildings near the shoreline. Panic spread quickly as businesses scrambled to save inventory. Nolan didn't run. He organized rescue efforts immediately. Warehouse workers formed human chains through waist-deep floodwater to move equipment and supplies to higher ground. Nolan himself spent hours carrying trapped elderly residents from nearby apartments into safety shelters established inside the warehouse. Then came the shocking moment nobody expected. A luxury corporate transport vehicle became stranded in rising water several blocks away. Inside was Vanessa Holbrook. Her driver escaped, but Vanessa remained trapped as flood currents slammed against the vehicle. Emergency responders struggled to reach her through submerged streets. Nolan went himself. Ignoring shouted warnings, he pushed through freezing water with a rescue rope tied around his waist while rain hammered the city under dark afternoon skies. Debris crashed around him as currents fought to drag him downstream. By the time he reached the vehicle, Vanessa was terrified, shaking violently as water climbed higher inside the car. The man she once declared finished smashed the window and pulled her out moments before the vehicle disappeared beneath the floodwater entirely. Back at the warehouse shelter, Vanessa sat wrapped in blankets watching Nolan move through crowds, helping exhausted families, comforting frightened children, and organizing volunteers despite complete physical exhaustion. For the first time in years, her carefully controlled expression cracked. She finally saw the difference between power and greatness. Months after the flood, news stories across the state praised Nolan Pierce and the warehouse community for saving dozens of lives during the disaster. Donations poured in. Investors offered support. Local businesses expanded rapidly through partnerships formed inside the cooperative center. The abandoned warehouse became a symbol of resilience throughout the city. And Vanessa changed too. She quietly stepped down as CEO later that year. Some said corporate pressure forced her out after public backlash over how Nolan had been treated. Others believed surviving the flood changed her perspective completely. Nobody knew for certain. But one bright afternoon nearly 3 years after Nolan lost his job, Vanessa returned to the warehouse again. This time there were no lawyers. No contracts. No arrogance. She simply walked through the busy courtyard where families gathered during a local business festival while music played beneath colorful banners fluttering in warm daylight winds. Ivy, now taller and more confident, recognized her immediately and offered her a handmade cupcake from the bakery stand. Vanessa accepted it with trembling hands. Nolan approached slowly. And for the first time ever, she apologized. Not like a CEO protecting reputation. Like a human being carrying regret. Nolan listened quietly beneath the afternoon sun while laughter echoed around them from the life growing inside the place once left to decay. He didn't offer revenge. He didn't humiliate her. He forgave her. Because pain had taught him something success never could. Broken people don't heal by destroying others. They heal by rebuilding what the world abandoned. If this story touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, comment, and share this video with someone who may need hope today. Stories like Nolan's remind us that losing everything does not mean losing yourself. And before this story ends, comment below, "Ruins can rise again." That simple sentence may inspire someone silently fighting battles nobody else can see. As the sun began setting over the riverfront that evening, golden light spilled across the old warehouse walls now covered with murals, flowers, and signs from dozens of thriving local businesses. Workers packed trucks while children played near food stands and music drifted softly through the warm air. Nolan stood beside Ivy watching the sky change colors above the city that once tried to erase them. Years earlier, he walked out of a glass tower believing his life was over. But sometimes the worst day of your life is only the beginning of the story meant to save you. And sometimes the people called finished are the ones who rebuild the world.